Hi, and welcome to Stump the Pastor. Today's question comes from Jamie in Rochester, Minnesota. She actually had two, so they were kind of in the same part of the Bible, so I decided to do them together. She asked, how old was Adam and Eve when they were created? And who did Eve's son marry to have grandchildren? Now, I'm taking these two questions together, Jamie, because they are kind of part of the same story. I mean, Adam and Eve are found in the second creation story in Genesis 2, and the story of Cain, the son who murders his brother before finding a wife, is in Genesis 4. Now, the tendency for many people of faith is to read these early stories of the Bible as historical narratives rather than as a faith narrative. The reason why there are two creation stories, for example, in the Bible is because people talked about creation differently. History is written to answer the question, how did it happen? Faith narratives are written to answer the question, where do we find God? Because the reality of God is not comprehensible to the human mind, our questions are shaped differently. As I've said before, when it comes to God and all things about God, the only questions we can ask are, what is it like? How do we make it reasonable? The story of Adam and Eve gives us clues that the story is a faith narrative by the symbolic names. Adam means human and sounds like the Hebrew word for ground. And Eve's name means being created bone out of my bones, and it reflects a primitive understanding of women being subservient to men. So Adam and Eve were representative human players in the faith narrative. The story gives us no clue to their age because that wasn't the point. The point is that humanity is made in the image of God. We aren't God, but we are like God. So you see what the story did there? So the story of Cain, after the time of the garden, also doesn't make sense if we try to read it as an historical narrative, for just the very reasons that Jamie asked in the question. If we try to make this story make sense in an historical way, then Cain's wife has to be his sister or his niece, all of which makes all of us go, ew. But this isn't the question the story is asking. Instead, the story describes the consequences of human destruction. Adam's family received the best of God's creation, and they still found a way to mess it up. It is the human story. Lying, murder, being outcast, afraid, all of those are the results of human choices when offered the bounty of God's grace. So this story resonates with us so powerfully because we've all done it. So when people ask, why is there violence or pain or sadness in our world? The creation stories give a faith narrative that tells us this is what it's like when, instead of choosing grace, we choose pride or envy or violence or fear or so forth. So, Jamie and all of you, I want to encourage you to read these stories again, not so you can figure out how to make them make sense, but to imagine how you would answer the questions the ancients were asking. Why are we here? What is God doing? What does this story tell us about humanity? Those are some of the questions that moved humanity from a primitive experience of God to those who became known as the chosen people of God. See you next week on Stump the Pastor. So there you go, Jamie. Let me know what you think. And if any of you have a question for Stump the Pastor, send it to my email address. It's on your screen. And we'll see you next time on Stump the Pastor.